Meantime, let's bring in Andy McCarthy, former assistant U.S. attorney, former federal prosecutor, and a Fox News contributor. Andy, I was just kind of dipping into Sandra's conversation there because Jen Psaki tweeted the following here. I want to read this. She says, quoting, "It has always been the decision of any Supreme Court justice if and when they decide to retire and how they want to announce it. And that remains the case today. We have no additional details or information to share at the White House. But there really has been a lot of pressure, Andy, on Justice Breyer to retire. I mean, you talk about this group, Demand Justice, launching that campaign, Breyer retire. What do you think about that? Because our last guest says, no, you don't really pressure a Supreme Court justice to step down. Do you buy into that, Andy?
Well, you do pressure him, but I agree with Trace with what Garrett Ventry told Sandra, which is that there's a big difference between pressure and force, right? The way our system is designed, nobody can force a Supreme Justice to do nothing. Basically, they are life tenured. Once they're appointed and on the court, they can't be forced. Now, I think with respect to Justice Breyer, he is a person of very good will. He's also a committed, progressive legal theorist. And he's obviously going to be concerned about how not only what his legacy on the court is, but how he gets replaced. And anybody who was thoughtful and who was of that bent of mind would have to look at the way the board is teed up, right? So if the Republicans take over Congress, take over the Senate in 2022, which is entirely possible, it's going to be harder for the Biden administration to get the nominee they want on the court, because they will have to deal with the Republicans in a way that they won't have to between now and the next Congress. So he's got to be taking that into account. And he probably doesn't want to be in the same situation. And you do at 83 have to think about your mortality and your ability to carry on. He doesn't want to see the Ginsburg situation arise again, I'm sure, where the opposite party in the Senate has the whip hand and can delay confirmation until after, say, the 2024 election, when a Republican would get potentially to replace him. So I think he thinks about all these things, and probably the pressure he puts on himself is more important than the pressure he gets from leftist groups.
I mean, just going through the list of possible nominees under President Biden, as we noted earlier, President Biden's promised repeatedly to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court when a position came available. So now, of course, we're going through the list of those possibilities, including Judge Michelle Childs of the U.S. District Court in South Carolina, Justice Leandra Kruger of the California Supreme Court. As I read down that list, I bring this point up from Jonathan Turley. He made it earlier. He also put it out on Twitter. The timing of the Breyer retirement, he says, is telling. Assuming Breyer remains on the court until June or July, it would allow just enough time for President Biden to secure a new confirmation, even with glitches and delays. Still awaiting a formal statement from his office, Andy. Weigh in on the possible replacements, some of those names I just mentioned and those that we put on the screen.
Well, I'm gonna do the smart thing here, Sandra, and go with Shannon, which is that I think Ketanji Brown Jackson is certainly the favorite here. The one qualification, at the D.C. Circuit, which is obviously a very important court and often a stepping stone to the Supreme Court. The other thing I throw into the mix about her, which I haven't heard too much of up till now, she's a Breyer clerk. She clerked for Justice Breyer on the Supreme Court.
Can I just add one thing to that, Andy? Just adding one thing to that. I want to add one thing to that, an interesting note from our Chad Pergram on Capitol Hill, that Brown Jackson is the sister-in-law of former House Speaker Paul Ryan.
Yeah, I still think, I think that's an interesting connection, but I think the Breyer connection is even more interesting. And the reason, Sandra, is remember when they were, the Trump administration was reportedly trying to pressure Justice Kennedy to step aside so that he would get an appointment. And who knows what those discussions were, but the next two appointments were Kennedy clerks, Neil Gorsuch and then Brett Kavanaugh. And I think it'd be foolish to think that those kind of like, gee, I wonder who would replace me conversations don't go on. And I also think the upside for Judge Jackson is she's already recently been confirmed by the Senate. So, you know, it would be very difficult to make a case that she's too radical to take the next step up because they just basically put her on a very important court.
I want to put that list back up on the screen if I can, Andy, because there's a number of power players on there, and I want to go to the second spot because that is Leandra Kruger. She is a California Supreme Court justice born in 1976. She's a former Obama Justice Department member, argued 12 cases before the Supreme Court. She clerked, you talk about someone, how, you know, Ketanji Brown Jackson clerked for Justice Breyer. She clerked for Justice John Paul Stevens. A sterling resume, and apparently, according to her colleagues, a very strong favorite for a Supreme Court seat if Biden holds on to his campaign promise of nominating a black woman. Do you know anything about her? And is the California Supreme Court, any state Supreme Court, as big a stepping stone to the Supreme Court as an appellate court, an appeals court, one of the district courts, Andy?
Trace, it doesn't happen as often, but that's a stellar credential. And what I know about that particular judge is pretty much the resume that you just outlined, which is a sterling resume, and it has the advantage of, I think she's about 6 years or so younger than Judge Jackson. So, you know, one of the things that is a consideration here is if you can get a judge of your liking onto the Supreme Court, the younger the better as far as they're concerned, right? Because she could be on for a very long time.
Yeah, I just want to, if I can really just Sandra, very quickly, what Andy was saying there, the last time it happened, the last U.S. Supreme Court justice that was taken from the state level back in 1981, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, Andy, to your point there. Sandra, sorry.
Yep.
Yeah, I was actually going to get this in. The reaction pouring in is really something. It goes a lot of different directions. And I'll read this to you from Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, Andy. Republicans should establish 2 simple tests for Justice Breyer's successor. First, they have to be competent. Second, they can be liberal but not radical. Elections have consequences, and it is legitimate for President Biden to nominate a solid liberal to the Supreme Court. Perhaps it's obvious, but he said it.
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the main rule here, you're going to be dealing with very stellar people. So the rule, probably the big qualification here is 50 plus 1 equals 51, which means they can get them confirmed. And on that basis, the only thing I would add is I don't think there's a prayer that Vice President Harris will be nominated to the Supreme Court, because you couldn't put her on the court without Biden effectively losing control of the Senate. Because what would happen is you'd have to get a new vice president confirmed, which means it would be up to Mitch McConnell when that happened, you know, when you would vote for a new vice president. And why would McConnell help Biden get back to 51 in the Senate? Doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, Andy McCarthy, we really appreciate you joining us on the Breaking News. I'm sure we'll see you back on.
Thank you.